Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness local applicant briefing for the Emergency Solutions Grant fiscal year 2022-2023 request for applications. My name is Rachel Waltz. I'm the manager of the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness. And over the next hour or so, we will be talking a bit about the Emergency Solutions Grant overview, some particulars about this year's funding competition, as well as the local deadlines and process, as well as reviewing the Orange County scorecard with any and noting any particular changes from the previous year's competition. This presentation will be posted on the Orange County Partnership website later today, and closed captioning is available with a live transcript recorded for folks to take a look at a later time. So, again, we'll be providing an overview of the ESG program, moving then into the local process and timeline, and also leaving some time for questions and answers. If you have any questions in the meanwhile, you're welcome to reach out to me at rwaltz@orangecountync.gov. So first, to give a bit of an overview of the Emergency Solutions Grant, which is funding that comes down from HUD. So there are really two main sources of federal homeless services funding in the United States. There's the Continuum of Care Funds, or COC, as well as the Emergency Solutions Grant funds. And as you can see, local funding has been fairly steady. Let's come into Orange County over the last 10 years or so, with a pretty significant increase that was due to COVID in 2020. And we will talk a bit more about the impact of that, that funding increase on a subsequent slide, but wanted to really kind of demonstrate that there's been a bit of a return to normal with this coming year's funding competitions. So, but broadly, the funds that come in through the Emergency Solutions Grant and the Continuum of Care funds, again, make up the bulk of the homeless services that are provided in Orange County. So again, with those two sources of homeless funds, the expectation is that funding competitions start at the local level to really tie into local priorities, because what services and supports we may need in Orange County may be very different than other communities. And so there are different eligible activities for each type of funding. So the Continuum of Care funds provide support for things like permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, HMIS, which is the Homeless Management Information System, prevention funds that are for high-performing communities only, as determined by HUD, coordinated entry, and Continuum of Care planning activities. And then the Emergency Solutions Grant is able to provide support for things like a crisis response. So that would be things like providing kind of an immediate support to people who are currently in a housing crisis or experiencing homelessness. So that would be things like shelter and street outreach, as well as housing stabilization activities. So to help folks kind of rapidly resolve their homelessness and get into housing and stay housed. And so that would be things like rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. Emergency Solutions Grant funds are also able to be used for HMIS and for administration. And so, but what we see here in red is what is currently funded in Orange County using both those Continuum of Care funds and the Emergency Solutions Grant funds. So after 2020, which saw a number of Emergency Solutions Grant cycles, there's really an attempt to return to normalcy in terms of at least the funding competitions, recognizing that the landscape has changed pretty dramatically with the continuing effects of COVID. So this year there will be two primary grants in Orange County. One is the Emergency Solutions Grant that we're discussing today, and the next is the Continuum of Care grant, and we'll be providing a local applicant briefing for that in 2 weeks. So again, from July 2022 through June 2023, there's the two grant cycles. The ESG competition, which is going on now, as well as the Continuum of Care 2022-2023 cycle, which was just released on August 1st, with some more information that's been shared locally with service providers in the community. Welcome. So as we dig a little bit further into Emergency Solutions Grant, kind of what it does and how it's administered, the HUD block grants ESG funds to larger communities and the state of North Carolina. And so some communities get a kind of direct entitlement. Those tend to be our larger communities here in North Carolina. And for some of the other communities, those funds are kind of managed out of the North Carolina Health and Human Services ESG office. So since Orange County is not an entitlement community, we're a subrecipient of those funds. And Orange County, as a continuum of care, is still tasked with determining the local priorities and process in order to recommend funding. And those funding decisions are ultimately made at the state level, at the state ESG office. So the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness serves as the continuum of care for Orange County. Because we like to be confusing, the COC both refers to that funding opportunity we discussed earlier, as well as a geographic area that encompasses the entirety of Orange County. So the Partnership to End Homelessness is jointly funded by the towns of Chapel Hill, Carborough, Hillsborough, as well as Orange County, with an administrative home in Orange County in the housing department. And so the continuum of care work really involves ongoing coordination with the resources that are coming into our community. And so that involves things like hosting the local funding competitions for the COC and ESG, the purpose for why you're here today, as well as making sure that we are charting a course to end homelessness in Orange County. So completing and updating a gaps analysis, hosting a number of meetings to make sure that we really have a firm understanding of what the community's priorities are, needs are, and to make sure that we are disseminating best practices. And so in April of 2020, the Partnership to End Homelessness added direct service work, starting with coordinated entry, which is a requirement for HUD funding to really become kind of the front door for the homeless service system, allowing for kind of a standardized assessment and then prioritization and referral process for HUD funded supports, as well as other housing supports in our community. The partnership also then added rapid rehousing, a housing access coordinator to work on some of those kind of system and supply issues, because we can't really talk about homelessness without talking more broadly about affordable housing. And then also a street outreach team that is jointly managed between the Partnership to End Homelessness and the Orange County Criminal Justice Resource Center, as well as homelessness prevention. So Orange County has applied for COC and ESG funding starting in 2019. Starting all the way back in 2013, which is hard to remember, the Partnership to End Homelessness was able to start to utilize planning grants for this really vital coordination work. And so this is just a brief chart of funding sources, years that these programs and services have been established, and then kind of the plan ongoing. So the Partnership to End Homelessness utilizes local funding from the 3 towns in the county for housing access coordinator, uses local funds and home tenant-based rental assistance for rapid rehousing, both staff and financial assistance. And then continuum of care funds starting in 2019 and then expanding, we'll be expanding this current year to include both coordinated entry and rapid rehousing based on a pretty long-lasting need in our community for both rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and a number of other gaps in our system. Starting in 2020, Orange County started receiving Emergency Solutions Grant funds for rapid rehousing. And then starting in 2020 and then continuing onward, Orange County was able to use Emergency Solutions Grant COVID funds to get started with our street outreach harm reduction and deflection team, street outreach funding through ESG CV wrapped up in, I believe it was November of 2021. But then funding continues through ESG CV for homelessness prevention, and then rapid rehousing, both staff and financial assistance. Any questions or comments before we move into the local process with timelines and scorecard? All right. So about 2 weeks ago or so, the state ESG office released the Emergency Solutions Grant FY22-23 request for applications. It was on July 19th. Orange County, like other non-entitlement communities in North Carolina, received a very slight bump in kind of the allotment based on the fair share. And so a total of $101,759 is available for Orange County. We use a what's called a kind of a 60-40 split. So to make sure that no more than 60% of funds are allocated for crisis response, and no fewer than 40% of funds are available for housing stabilization activities. So that means that a total of $61,055 is available for crisis response, including street outreach, emergency shelter operations, and emergency shelter services. And that no less than $40,704 is available for housing stability activities like rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. There are 2 other eligible categories under this grant. So HMIS, that Homeless Management Information System database, as well as administrative costs for fiscal sponsors and local units of government. So hard to believe that it was sent, that we sent out information to stakeholders on July 19th that due to the release of the COC competition and deadline is already slightly out of date. So I'll be highlighting some changes to the timeline here, as well as sharing those via email and social media. So if folks have questions, please feel free to reach out. But broadly, we sent out information to provide a background on this grant opportunity, as well as highlighting the role and responsibility of the project review committee, and then sharing kind of the timeline for the local competition. So to talk a bit more about which elements of the partnership to end homelessness are involved in funding competitions, really kind of 2 areas where these processes and recommendations happen. So first, the project review committee is tasked with reviewing applications, developing recommendations, and then also providing monitoring and oversight for ESG and COC funded programs throughout the year. And then the leadership team, which serves as the partnership board of directors, really makes the final decisions on recommending funding projects. And then, like I said, the state ESG office makes the ultimate funding decisions. And so work is currently underway now for the ESG grant competition, and will continue over the next month or so. And so at this point, again, Tuesday, July 19th, information was shared to service providers in the community. The state ESG office, in response to some feedback that they had received from the previous year's competition, actually moved up the instructional sessions that they were offering to service providers in the community. And so the final state ESG office instructional session was yesterday. And then today, here we are hosting the local applicant briefing. And so the deadline for submitting project applications for this year's competition will be Thursday, September 1st at 12 noon. And we'll talk a bit more about what's actually entailed in submitting those applications to the partnerships. We can then share those with the project review committee. So the week of September 1st, the project review committee will score project applications using the tool we'll share in just a moment. And then the week of September 4th, the project review committee will meet to formulate recommendations. And then the week of September 11th, the Partnership to End Homelessness Leadership Team will meet to determine funding recommendations. And those recommendations will then be, project applicants will be notified the next day about those funding recommendations. And then we'll talk next about some steps that follow once those recommendations are made. And then the Partnership to End Homelessness will send the completed ESG application to the state office in advance of the deadline of Monday, October 3rd. I do just want to note that the highlighted sections in bold here are a departure from the local timeline that was shared back on July 19th. In order to participate in both the ESG and COC funding competitions, we will need to kind of move up our regularly scheduled project review committee meeting and leadership team meeting. So I just want to highlight those changes here. So after applicants submit the application and supporting documents, the work continues. So the project review committee and staff will continue to review the applications using tools that y'all provide to help populate things like participation and some of the objective criteria that are used to score and rank projects. And we may request changes for clarity or consistency. We may also request funding amount changes depending on the recommendations of the leadership team. And then once an application change is complete, the project review committee will submit, will request that the agency submit your local project applications into Smartsheet to ESG. One thing I want to note, that was another change the state ESG office made this year that may be a relief to folks. Now we will be able, project applicants will be able to submit supporting documents in zipped folders, which gets around kind of the 10 document limit through Smartsheet. And so I do really want to just underscore that the community application scoring considers only what's submitted by the deadline of Thursday, September 1st at 12 noon. And so in terms of what to submit, we're looking for folks to submit a PDF of the ESG 22-23 project application, as well as the supporting attachments. One of the attachments is noted, and I'll share kind of a PDF of it in just a moment, is the Continuum of Care Participation and Coordination Agreement. So that is something that for project applicants will need to be sent to a representative of OCPEH to complete and then sign. And then also a completed Continuum of Care FY22-23 scorecard that we'll review in just a moment, as well as spending documentation from the state ESG office for your most recent ESG annual grant, and then HMIS reports from April 1, 2021 to March 31st, 2022 for each ESG funded project. So again, both a CAPER and an APR, and obviously offering kind of detailed instructions for project applicants on the partnership's website. Any questions from folks before I put a pin in our presentation here and move over to the rating and ranking tool? Alrighty. So, oh, sorry. First, I was just thinking, let's, yeah, Stephanie, go ahead.
Did you say to submit that PDF of the application and all the attachments via email to you? How did you say to submit that?
Yes, that's correct, Stephanie. Yeah, I don't know if you remember, you sent about 22 attachments last year. So we will keep that coming for this year. But then when once everything is kind of reviewed and finalized, the project applications and attachments do get submitted to the state ESG office via Smartsheet, and I'll share that link once it's available.
Okay, great. So email to you, and then after the process, submit to ESG via Smartsheet. Okay.
Yeah, you got it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. And Stephanie, are you seeing the attachment checklist right now?
Yes.
Super sorry. juggling the things. So this should look fairly familiar to folks. The attachments that are noted here are also found on the state ESG website. And if you just do a Google for like NC ESG application, it comes up. I can also make sure to share the actual link, and the link is actually on the partnership's website. And I would encourage folks to kind of check back with the ESG with that website, because the ESG office may still be revising the application itself. I know that I saw that there was a recent kind of revised version that was posted just in the last week or so. So just keep an eye out for that. So again, ultimately folks will need to submit to the Partnership to End Homelessness for review by the Project Review Committee. And then selected applications will be submitted to the state ESG office via the Smart Sheet as a signed and completed application, a project budget worksheet, a caper. They actually left these dates kind of open, and so Orange County, for consistency's sake, is asking all project applicants to submit a caper and an APR for ESG annual funded programs from April 1st, 2021 through March 31st, 2022. They're also looking for the current year's operating budget for the entire organization, not just the ESG funded portion. The COC participation and coordination agreement form. Let's see if I actually have it here. Oops. I did not. It's also linked on the state website, and I'll share it also on the partnership's website. An organizational chart for the entire organization. Again, not just the ESG funded program. A board of directors information form, including name, contact info, board position, term, occupation, and employer or representing entity, race, gender, lived experience, and professional skills that add to the capacity of your organization's leadership. The organization's audit for the most recent closed fiscal year, your ESG program operations guidelines, any HUD corrective action plans, if applicable, and then any city or county ESG corrective action plans. And then these are the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Service required contract certification forms to actually enter into a contractual agreement with the state. So that would be the no overdue taxes certification, the annual IRS tax exemption verification, annual conflict of interest verification, conflict of interest policy, current certificate of insurance, IRS tax exemption letter, subbing the W-9, organization's financial policies, and then shelter services and operational projects are required to also submit a shelter habitability inspection that occurs no earlier than August 2022. Any questions about any of that before we move into the scorecard? Alrighty. So, let's see if this, does this size feel okay? Viewable broadly? Okay, thank you. So there are some changes that I've noted in bold here as we try to incorporate new project types that exist in Orange County or that may be interested in applying, as well as an effort to really develop some baselines around some things like housing first practices, reasonable costs, the way that agencies are, and then we look to kind of further refine some of our metrics around the way that agencies are advancing equity, particularly racial equity, and centering people with lived experience. And some of these changes were made in consultation with the data and grants work group, and then were finalized by the project review committee earlier this year. And so first, with one of the basic threshold requirements here is that project services are aligned with the housing first system orientation, and that the additional part here is that agencies agree to provide staff support to participate in a cross COC monitoring pilot. So this is a pilot program, pilot kind of monitoring intervention